case has existed since 1965, and all that time, we and many others have been campaigning to change the education system into something which supports children. And look where we are now. I think we've had a very good overview of what's happened, and it's very depressing. So here and today and in the future, we must campaign even more strongly to change where we are. So we're looking forward now to hearing from everybody else. Thank you to Carl and thank you to Gus. Stay here for a minute because we're going to ask you to respond. But we'd like anyone online in the room to ask questions of Carl or put forward any suggestions, make any comments. We want to collect your views as well. So does anybody wish to comment, question, make a suggestion? Yes.
Yeah, the mental health of primary teachers in particular is dire. The suicide rate is higher.
Could you just introduce yourself? Oh, sorry.
My name is Ros Kane. And I'm interested in preparation for parenthood in schools. That's my sort of thing. The books are up there. But as you said, somebody said Ruth Perry was just the tip of the iceberg. And an organisation I'm involved in, we support teachers, one-to-one support system. And the pain that they have, both problems at home plus problems at school. It's amazing that they can teach classes of children. So when I'm thinking of a school like Galleon's Primary School in Beckton, where the children are taught through the arts, they do philosophy for children. I doubt if the teachers there feel suicidal at all. I think they keep their teachers who are happy there. So I think these are important things to talk about. And I also, don't like the idea that we judge schools by GCSE results, because education is not about passing exams. It's about much else. And I think when you teach kids about babies and children and parenting, they come to school, kids who stay away from school, they come to school for that lesson.
Yes.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to say? Yes, Alan.
School inspection started in the latter part of the 19th century when we had new ad hoc bodies in public health and this and that. And there was this principle that you needed an inspection system, not just in education, but in public health and various other things, where one group of professionals held another group of professionals to account, but the report was to the name. Have we got to a point now where society is so difficult and complicated that if we were advocating a new system, we would have to park that approach of the last quarter of the 19th century?
Anybody else? And yes, Michael.
Yeah, I agree with what Alan's just said. One of the differences, of course, was that until Ofsted, these reports were not hugely made part of a neoliberal idea of schools competing against one another for pupils, and consequently these judgments, you see them written up on school name boards, don't you? Especially on school name boards where the school wants to have more pupils, and Ofsted serves excellence and so on. Coming back to the idea of neoliberalism, I think one of the huge problems we face, because every government since 1979 has adopted the same philosophy, is the idea that public services are inferior to private services, and that competition between public services is a good thing to promote because it will cause people to, quote, raise their game, unquote. I'd just like to tell a very quick story. Back in the 1990s, the school I was working in was recommended by our Parents Teacher Association for a charter mark. Do you remember charter marks? John Major's charter marks. And they were supposed to be awarded to institutions delivering public services which were deserving of recognition and merit. And our parents had had not really understood the idea, and they'd recommended the school for a charter mark because their own children who attended it were very highly motivated. They thought the school was a fun place to attend. They were well looked after. There were lots and lots of interesting things going on in the school, and they were keen to attend. And these were parents who had quite a lot of money, could easily have bought out of the system. So a civil servant arrived from Whitehall, and the headmaster was busy, so I was left to deal with him. And he spent all morning explaining to me that the school was not eligible for a charter mark, and that the parents had completely misunderstood the point. And I said, what is the chief thing that's lacking? And he said, there's nothing about your complaint system. And the whole implication is that, well, it's a bit like the Combs hotline. Remember the Combs hotline? And I think there is a huge problem. And that's why Ofsted is such a punitive institution, but it's based on the same idea that public service is by definition an inadequate thing, and we must whip it into shape.
Carl, do you want to comment?
Well, I'm thinking Denmark. I'm thinking Scandinavia, and people working together, being supportive, understanding your situation and your skills, and room for development, but we'll do it arm in arm, so to speak. Here, it somehow, there's a certain toughness, tough parent almost, quite willing to use the iron fist to make people fall into line, to conform with the requirements as set out, without really looking at the situation people are in, the skills they have, the experience that they have brought to the situation they're in at the moment, and understanding that these people do want to do the best they can in the schools where they're working, and it is unhelpful for you to stand over them with a rod or the iron fist or whatever. And I think that is where, which applies, I don't think, just to education, it's to other public services. Taxpayers' money, we've got to look after it, make sure it's spent properly. But it's spent properly if you encourage, support, develop, cherish the professionals that you spent money training over the years. And I ran the primary PGCE at Canterbury for 10 years and loved it. And I think they love doing the job. And it's looking for ways in which they can be the best sort of teacher they can be in terms of the sort of personality they bring to the job and so on. Not, this is the way you do it, follow the guidelines to the letter. It is relationships and fitting in with the group of workers you're with, fellow teachers, and with the sort of children that come in. And we've got to shift things in that direction.
We have, and develop a kind of inspection and schools of the positive values that you described very clearly, the complete opposite of what's happening now. But yes.
I speak as somebody who I was called a school inspector before
Do you
the
want to
days of...
say who you are?
Oh, sorry, I'm Linda Pound. I speak as somebody who was a school inspector. I'd worked for the local authority. And actually, that was the model we had. We cared about the schools that we were responsible for. We were able to take time over development, support them. We knew them well enough to know what was the next thing they should go to and so on. So it was a very strong model. And you mentioned local authorities. Of course, now they don't have the money to do that. And that's, I think, a huge loss. I think the other part of that was that HMI were at that time very highly respected. They were independent, and they brought genuine strength to the system as well.
So indeed, absolutely, yes.
So Peter Timms, I want to suggest the reason why we haven't seen changes to Ofsted over such a long period, despite enormous reasons for it. And if we listen to the Secretary of State for Education talking about Ofsted, the main audience in her speech are parents and the general public. It's not to teachers and the educational system. And the surveys show that the public like Ofsted. They appreciate it. They think it's objective. And that affects the voting potential of the public. The fact that it hasn't made a difference, or rather maybe had a negative impact over its years of existence, is by the by. The government want to be re-elected, and they know that this is a popular thing to be doing, right or wrong. Give the teachers a good kicking. It's objective data. If I move to a new area, which school should I send my kids to? I'll look it up on Ofsted. There's the problem, and we're not addressing it.
I agree. Have we trust Ofsted?
Well, no, but the public do.
No, I know.
So there's the problem. What do we do about it?
But we have to change that narrative somehow or other.
That's very difficult to do.
Sorry, John.
I'll come in a moment. You've got Graham Clayton on screen. Wants to come in. Okay, and then I'll come in as well.
Who's
Is it from
like to John? Would you
the
just
solicitor, the NUT?
well, I
Graham, you're muted.
Yeah.
who is it who wants to speak?
He's on screen now.
Okay, can you hear that?
Right.
Yeah, I do think we really need to reflect on exactly the purpose for which Ofsted was created. It has always seemed to me that it was in fact created to support the implementation of an obsession with the theory that in some way the consumer market achieves quality. And of course, that obsession was first put forward way back in the time of Keith Joseph's occupation of office, and was felt to be implemented by Kenneth Baker shortly after he had removed from the system the same kind of quality enforcement that everybody else in employment has. That is, having an employer which support an employer made up of people who are part of the same service that teachers provide in schools, who are themselves educationalists, who are themselves inspectors with what were then local authorities. After they were removed, and this fiction was created of the idea that governing bodies can operate a system when they attend meetings on Tuesday evenings when they get home from work and they're already tired out. A ludicrous idea. And there's a system which then removes what everybody else in employment has, which is an employer who supports their work with knowledge about how their work is being done. And Ofsted was created, it seems to me, in order to give the information to the market, to the consumer market, so that they could follow up on this theory of securing quality by protest, by complaint. And it has always seemed to me a system then which is given to bullying. There is no other means of enforcement of the decisions which Ofsted makes and the views which it expresses, other than to go out there and ask people to complain, to make a fuss, essentially to bully, without the kind of background, without the kind of support that local education authorities used to be able to give from their inspection processes. And we really need, I think, to think about the problem, having had some reflection on the purpose for which Ofsted was created, along those lines, if I'm right about my impression of why it was created, and realize that this is fundamentally flawed. Fundamentally flawed because it really only gives opportunity to a vocal select sector of the population in order to make their protests, their complaints. Ofsted, so far as I'm concerned, or an inspection system, should, in my view, simply be to advise government on the state of the education service nationally. And we need to restore, for me, a system in which teachers are, and people who work in the education system, the whole of the education workforce, has a proper employer which is supportive of their role in schools. Proper employers in terms of, shall we say, perhaps regional education authorities, whatever they may be, but restore to the system an arrangement in which there can be accountability of the education workforce to a proper employer, and that the proper employer should in turn be accountable to the public at large, and in particular to the consumer market, if I can put it that way, the consumer market of education.
And a system which celebrates everything in schools that is done, rather than looks for flaws or difficulties. John, I think you wanted to say something.
Please, yeah. Okay, I want to pick up on a couple of things. One is there's an issue with neoliberalism in whether it actually exists or not, and whether we're actually looking at is kind of good management. And it's just, and it's actually we liberals who have brought together these systems of good management into an ism. But I'll take it back to its foundations, was really Milton Friedman, Friedrich Hayek, economists who were looking at market forces, and the idea that market forces were the most efficient way of deploying resources and understanding people's preferences and priorities. And we can see in that framework, we can see Ofsted as a way of informing decision making. So parents and parents become consumers. Education is a what do you call it? A good to be sold, and it's how you receive it, where you go to receive that, and it's informing market forces. And one of the things that we're not going to I don't think we'll talk about today, is actually how that's is actually how that has then developed into the academy system, and how what Gove was looking at, in 2010, was to try and put schools in direct competition by introducing a greater degree of commercialism into the education system. With the intention, eventually, of all schools being independent commercial entities that would then be in direct market competition with each other. And therefore, you wouldn't need Ofsted, because parents would simply be making market decisions about the schools that they are then sending their kids to. And the ultimate of that would be the education vouchers that King Joseph first came up with. And the idea is that you pay your taxes and then you get a voucher, you get a voucher which you physically give to a school, like a cheque. And we, market forces take over, and we introduce into the state system the same kind of forces that apply in the private education system. You choose the school you want to send your child to. It is your money that is making that choice, and it's your money that keeps that school delivering in the way that you want it to. The other thing I'll comment on is the values that Carl touched on, and the idea that Ofsted has almost a checklist of what a good school looks like. And we tend to value what we can measure rather than measure what we value. Mm-hmm. And what we value is things like camaraderie, spirit. All three of my kids went to John Roan. John Roan eventually was forced to become an academy, but my kids had a good education there in the broadest sense. They all did well, they all went to university, but they also made friends from across the social spectrum, friends that they maintain now. And they learnt much more broadly than simply those academic skills.
Thank you, John. Do you want to comment at this stage?
Well, it's the more I've read on it and thought about it and listened now, the more fundamental I think the change has to be. And maybe it's not an office for standards in education. We need even another name which somehow would convey a different sort of purpose. Because it is this, how do we support? How do we develop? And the whole business of local authority education professionals, local advisors and so on, has gone. And it's quite interesting speaking to a local authority senior member of staff talking about, well, the schools would like us to do this, but all of the money has been, what is the phrase, delegated. And it's very difficult to take to the schools forum the proposal to de-delegate money. It's a new term, but the money is out there given to the schools, and we can't get it back from them. And what school would volunteer to have a reduced budget? But some form of localism would be, which we would be going back to. But how you frame that, I'm not sure. And some have said it's no good saying local authorities bring them back in, Matt's throw them away, because it won't happen. But maybe it will, because we do need this encouragement amongst local professionals, if you like, husbanded or whatever, by a local authority that will bring these things together for the sake of the local people who send their children to schools in their area. So whether that's a way forward, to bring back some element of the local authorities that we used to have. And we don't need Ofsted, we don't need 2,000 who dot around the country, judging and moving on with no responsibility. If they're going to judge, there ought to be some local responsibility to help put things right where they're wrong, to help spread good practice where they find it, and be generally supportive of schools to make it a job that people want to do, that they want to stay in, because we're losing teachers very quickly after qualification, and the number of head teachers retiring early is also a worry.
We want schools to be joyful places where everybody wants to go, and that is not happening at the moment. Alan, sorry, is there somebody online?
You got one on screen, yeah.
Can you just call their name, because I can't see?
Ron Latter.
Ron Glatton. Sorry, I'll come back to you, Alan, but
I'd love to hear Ron. He's a
Ron.
good man.
To follow up on what Carl said, sorry, it says unmute myself. I thought I'd done that. Yeah, it's just to follow up on what Carl said. I did come across this document from the organisation called Labour Together, which seems to be pushing very hard the notion of devolution, and they were talking about devolution in health and in schools as well. Now, I haven't followed up on that, and I haven't looked at it in detail, but I thought if they were doing that, then that is something that we might link on to say this is something that's absolutely crucial here. It might also have an impact on the way the system is currently owned and run, which is the whole business of academies as well. So I think that notion of pushing hard on the devolution theme might be worth following up.
Thank you, Ron. Alan, do you want to say something?
My name's Alan Evans. I was for 20 years head of education at UT, succeeded by Michael Bob, and then John Banks, who happened to be next to me. What I want to say is that I found in the last 20 minutes of discussion one of the best I've ever heard on this issue. And I'm persuaded, Carl, that from your input and from several inputs, Graham Payton used to be the solicitor at the AMT. That's the best I've ever heard him. I've never heard him speak with that quality. He happens to be married to a brilliant primary head teacher. But that's neither here nor there. So the point I wanted to make was that when I asked you the question about the last quarter of the 19th century, it was a good system then. But then I'm sobered by what Peter said about the public at large out there. They think that Ofsted's a good thing. And that the debate and the argument is, I'm moved by saying, yes, let's strengthen local government. Let's have a proper educational system where the senior management of the education system under local authorities is part of wanting quality and excellence. And we grow the system from that. And you separate, inspectorate give reports to government nationally. And that's what they did brilliantly in the 70s. Sheila Brown, Norman Thomas. Some of those reports on primary education, secondary, they were superb reports and a proper dialogue with the profession, not judgmental dialogue, a judgment about what are we doing, what is quality education in primary, what is quality in special education. And in preamble, of course, the Warnock report, which led to the integration of special education. I doubt whether we could have had a Warnock if we didn't have an inspectorate of that quality in the 70s. So I'm really heartened about the discussion so far.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else, John, online?
No.
Anybody in this room who wants to add anything? Because I'm going to ask you to conclude.
Yes, I just wanted to follow up on what John was saying about market forces in education. The huge fallacy, of course, that underlies it is that it doesn't matter which children go to the school. The school is somehow held to be an instrument of education, regardless of who the children are. But children are not empty pictures like you see in Dickens's Hard Times. They bring to the school all kinds of things, good things and bad things. And what has happened, of course, by adopting this market forces approach is that some schools are able to choose the children that they will admit, and other schools are obliged to have the children that nobody else wants. And that, of course, explains Carl's graph, table rather, showing that you are much more likely to get a good Ofsted report if you have a school full of middle-class children from supportive homes. And going back to Nordicote, one of the things that wasn't the absolute sort of disjunction between, on the one hand, saying exam results are marvellous, and I agree, exam results are not the be all and end all by any means. Children are making good progress, but we don't see much good teaching. Now, they should have stopped to think about the implications of that. You know. Well, the only thing I remember from my PGCE many years ago, educational psychology lectures, is that the key to education is learning is motivation. Yeah. And that the job of teachers is not to perform, but to motivate. And that usually involves developing good relationships with the children, and developing good relationships with the parent community, and so that's much more important than having good lesson plans and you know, exactly, and making the children say, we are going to learn, this is how we're going to do it, this is what we have learned, whether they have or not. And as long as you have a market forces notion, then you will end up with what we've got, which is a hierarchy of schools. Yeah,
I need to avoid turning this into a retired NUT official's love-in, but I did just very quickly want to make a point. People are referring to local authorities, and unfortunately to me, it's forgotten that they were local education authorities until the regulations, I think in 1999, nobody noticed, changed their names back to local authorities. And the significance of the point that they were local education authorities, that they existed, of course, coterminous alongside the local authorities, but they were education specific, and they included, by legal requirements, they included people who were themselves education professionals. And they had that role of employing the school workforce, in particular teachers. And they had that mechanism through education professionalism to drive up quality and be accountable for their decisions.
Thank you for reminding us, Graham. I'm going to go to Carl.
Yeah, well, it's just accountability. I'm just reading here as Michael Fulham, an American writer on all good things in education, writes, accountability has been the bugbear of human systems for millennia. I think that makes you take a deep breath. I mean, accountability, is it that accountability applied in the education profession to the schools which we send our children to? Is accountability the right term? It sounds punitive. It sounds as though you're bringing in standards which you, as a worker in the classroom, say, have had no part in developing. But it's a harsh word, and it's an unhelpful word. To be held accountable, but it doesn't come with, and how can I help you to be better? What can I contribute that would improve things for you, for the children, for the parents? And I do think that Ofsted claiming to be a service to parents, so they know which school to send their children to, is a myth. The school looks nice and it's got a nice poster outside about how good it is, and it's local, that'll do. But by and large, it's not Ofsted that serves that purpose, and they ought to relegate it to the bottom of a long list of things they claim to be offering.
Thank you, Carl, very much. And thank you to Gus, who sadly is not with us. I think it's really important that we continue this discussion in a positive light, that we look at the inspection should look at the good practice that happens. If they focused on good practice and what's good in schools, we'd have a completely different atmosphere. And I think the other thing is that many schools spend hours of their time discussing how they're going to meet Ofsted's expectations. And it is a complete, in my view, takes away completely from what schools are about. They're about educating young people, enabling them to thrive, develop skills. And that is not happening, sadly. That's why so many young people are leaving. So many teachers are also leaving, because it's not, schools are not, I mean, obviously there are different examples, but there are schools that are not joyous, welcoming, stimulating, and enabling young people to develop from their own interests as well as the skills. We're going to hear after the coffee break, we're going to break from Kenny Frederick, former head teacher of secondary school, and James Lane, who is the head of a primary school, of the impact of the Ofsted inspections on their schools and on young people. It saddens me that because education is about young people of all ages, very rarely are they mentioned or brought into the conversation, because they're the ones that suffer, if you want to say suffer, from what is happening around them and all the issues that have been raised by Carl and Gus and Michael in his summary of Ofsted and other speakers. We don't talk about the impact on children and young people. And it should be a totally positive experience for every young person, and recognition that every young person is unique and can offer contributions. Now, Becky Francis, who you all know, is leading on the curriculum and assessment review, persists in saying the review is about evolution and not revolution. I think when you said earlier, Carl, reform wasn't good enough, which is more or less what you said, revolution is what we need, both of the school system and of the inspection system. If we had a better school system, we'd have a much better inspection system.